Looks like we are recording. So thank you
Okay.
for coming today. I'm Melanie, and we'll be going over the website to use as an alternative to your book this week and into next week for icd10data.com. This will
Okay.
cover both classes 2011 and 2021. So I'm going to start with sharing my screen here. And really, I just wanted to do this video with you today to kind of go over how we use the website and where to find some of the guidelines and other guidance that you would find in the actual code book
Okay.
while we don't have the books in hand. It'll give us accurate coding. It won't necessarily guide us the way that the code books will. And of course, we want that hands-on experience because you'll need that to accomplish a coding job or certification. So let me see. There we go. There's the share screen. You should be able to see my screen here, and I'll be looking over to the right because I have a dual screen set up. Okay. Can you see the screen okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. So on this website, this is just the plain website, icd10data.com. I've used this in the past when I used to work for a small family practice and we couldn't necessarily afford new books every year. This is a free website that provides us with current and up-to-date coding. So it's kind of a nice tool to have, and there's a few resources like that out in the world. Most of them cost money. This one does not. It does have information on our ICD-10 CM and PCS coding manuals, as well as some references for HCPCS if you're in the professional coding world, which we will not be talking about in either of these two classes.
Okay.
So some of the benefits for it, it's really nice if you can't afford a new book every year or if your office doesn't purchase them. The disadvantages are that it doesn't give you the guidance that the code books actually give you when you go through the tabulars, when you're learning to go through the alphabetical and into the index, which is something you're going to hear a lot from me these first couple of weeks. So as we talk about those different indexes, keep in mind there's two halves to the actual coding book. And so, if you'll give me just a moment here, I have to move my cat. For 2011, this is what the ICD-10 CM coding book looks like. And the very front of our coding book has all of our tables, diagrams, and references, which you'll learn about in more detail in this first couple of weeks, and the alphabetical index, which is about roughly a third of the book. When you're using this website, you can find the indexes here. And you can go into just the ICD-10 index or external cause index, which are part of the alphabeticals that we'll talk about, the table of drugs and table of neoplasms, which we also talk about. And so if I go here, I can search alphabetically by the term of the procedure I'm looking up. So let's say, for example, I have a provider who is diagnosed diabetes with hyperglycemia, which is high blood sugars.
Okay.
I'm going to go in under diabetes. And one trick you can use, you can scroll down the 410 and terms, that fall under the letter D. You can filter the list by typing in diabetes. One of the disadvantages, of course, as you're typing certain terms in, it's only going to find the term how you spell it. So you want to make sure you have your accurate spelling. If there's other synonyms, like you can see diabetes and diabetic here, but if only one of them populated, you may not find that if you don't think to spell that. So that's one disadvantage of just going straight by typing. You can also, I'm just going to take a step back here. On most computers, you can hit Control F, which pulls up this little find box.
Okay.
Let's see. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
And then from here, I can do the same thing where I can type in diabetes or diabetic, and it'll take me further down the list without eliminating the rest of the list. So if I know,
Okay.
like, I want to see the rest of the terms that are available, that's one way to keep it open.
Okay.
On this website, they also provide some information for previous code sets, so you can kind of hover over this little note here to see some of the other information. Most of this is billing information that you won't be using in this class.
Okay.
Although of note, questionable as an admission diagnosis, this is something that if you're in the inpatient setting, you would want to know what's allowed as an admission diagnosis. And that's something that you would learn as out of your ICD-10 book as well.
Okay.
When I click on this, it's going to break down all of the different options that fall under diabetes and diabetic. So there's several different types. This actually, for 2011, I do like how it's organized on the website because it does show a little bit more of the detail, like how you would look in the alphabetical. When you're in the alphabetical, you start on the left, and then each breakdown is indented. And so you want to count it as building a term. So you have diabetic due to drugs and chemicals with amniotrophy. Diabetic or diabetes due to drugs and chemicals with cataracts. And so you're going to build it like that. And of course, when you don't have drugs or chemicals as the type, you're going to keep going past that branch.
Okay.
You get to the next one, due to an underlying condition with cataracts.
Okay.
Nope, not an underlying condition. Maybe I'm looking for type 1. I have gestational. I have a couple of different types. Of course, keep in mind that sugars are not the only type of diabetes. And eventually you'll come down here till you find type 1 diabetes, type 1 with, and then we said hyperglycemia. We would want to pay attention to the differences between hyper and hypo, and we can see those hyperlinks here. We can also hover over the information about this code.
Okay.
So once I get to this point, this is where you're going to find some of the information like your excludes notes and some of your other details. I always, in every single, every time you see me talking about coding, I talk about how we should reference the chapter guidelines, reference chapter notes, because there may be some exclusions that apply to the entire chapter. And then we reference the sectional notes and we reference the category notes. The way you're going to see that in here, it takes a little bit more time to find all of that. It's not as easy as flipping to the beginning of the page. So when we see this whole thing, once we found our diabetes, we can see the section here. There's 2 different sections. We can see the code that we're looking at, which is E10.65. And we can see the category, which is those first 3 digits. We can see some of the information about when this code became effective. We can also hover and see the codes in order how we might see it in the tabular here.
Okay.
When you look on here as well, anytime you have this red arrow versus a green one, it means continue coding. That's not a complete code. That's extremely important when you're learning ICD-10 CM coding. You'll notice that in the actual books, it'll tell you 6 character required or a 6 symbol. Here it's just red arrow. So you want to hover and you want to pay attention to that. You can click on any of these hyperlinks to get to the sections. And so we know that we're in chapter for endocrine and nutritional and metabolic diseases, E00 through E89. And I can just click on that hyperlink to see any notes and exclusions that apply to the entire chapter. I see here that if there's any neoplasms, I'm in the wrong area. I see here that if it's related to a newborn, I'm in the wrong area. Those are the only notes and exclusions that apply to the chapter. Now I can go back to my diabetes, remembering that it was E10 by clicking on the section here, or I can
Okay.
hit back to go back to where I was and verify what was the next thing.
Okay.
Here, this is the section notes. There's no specific section notes for diabetes here. There are guidelines, and guidelines you'll want to have pulled up separately.
Okay.
And we have an activity this week, if you haven't looked at it yet, in 2011, talking about how to pull up guidelines. And then I hit back again, or you could continue by hitting the hyperlink to type 1, how we did earlier.
Okay.
And also see here that same breakdown, how the tabular might load the code so that you can see what comes where.
Okay.
By hovering over these little notebooks. And then your section notes, you can actually hover and see those here.
Okay.
Or your, not your section, sorry, your category notes. And so I can see for category A10, type 1 diabetes mellitus, it includes several types of diabetes, and I would want to look at those and make sure the type I'm looking for is in it. It excludes, it has a type 1 excludes note for several types of diabetes that you would find elsewhere. So for example, we said diabetic patient with hyperglycemia, but if the provider had only said hyperglycemia, you can see there's an excludes note saying that if it's not specified as diabetes, we would go to this R code, which is a symptom.
Okay.
Once we verify all of that, then you're ready to code. And you would keep going, even though we have the code E10.65, it's the same thing as when we're reading it in the code book. You want to verify all the code options building up to 6.5. And I think the best way to do that from here, let's see, where were we when we saw that? I would say the best way is just to go under E10. If you just click there.
Okay.
And make sure that you build it. That does not give you the building option. I apologize. There. So where I clicked on when I clicked on the category, it says E10 must have a greater level of detail, meaning it must be coded to a higher specificity. And we can see also that it has that red arrow here telling us that.
Okay.
And when I click on that hyperlink, it took me here, which gave me all the clinical notes. So this is all information you would actually find in your code book.
Okay.
And then it gives me the breakdown like the tabular would read. And so I'm going to talk a lot in this class about reading up and down. This is what I mean. When you go to a category, even though you know it's E10.65 according to the alphabetical, always keep in mind what you found in the alphabetical may or may not be the most accurate. And for that reason, you want to read all of the branches. And so I start with the next character. So the fourth character is .1, ketoacidosis. If that doesn't apply, ignore everything below the .1 and go to the .2. And then keep your way through these until you find the correct subcategory. Obviously, if it's not .3, we don't need to read any of the other .3 somethings. So we keep going until we get to .4, and you can see how these are tabbed in and out. So I can see the next level here is here, as opposed to these that were further in.
Okay.
.4 is neurological complications. If that doesn't apply, we keep going down to our next subcategory, which is circular complications. .6, other specified complications. So this point, we know that it is specified as hyperglycemia. It's an other category. We want to make sure that that is in fact the correct one. And so we're going to keep building that under the E10.6, but take a look and make sure that there's no other categories that would apply before you select other.
Okay.
And so that's reading down before I select the .6 as my fourth category or subcategory. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes.
Okay. And so at that point, you would just get to your code. E10.6 is accurate. And then we would go to the next subcategory, which is E10.6.1. And we can see that it's required because it has that red arrow, and we keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Another red arrow applies. And so we would say diabetic arthropathy, skin complications, oral complications, hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia. And hyperglycemia has a green arrow, so that is the highest level of specificity.
Okay.
All that to get to that code. In all honesty, there's a lot of steps using the book as well as using this website. This website's just a little bit more ins and outs than we're used to. So do you have any questions in using it for selecting ICD-10 CM codes for your 2011 class?
No.
Okay.
I'm fine.
So then for that purpose, we'll move on to the 2021 class on ICD-10 PCS, which I believe you're in both, Sophia.
Yes, and that's the one I don't have to look for.
Okay, so for the reference on the recording as well. Get into the ICD-10 PCS codes, you're going to do the same thing by clicking at the top here next to codes and go down to ICD-10 PCS codes. This one is not going to be as easy to find a code as it is with diagnostic codes, but it is going to allow us the opportunity to pull up some codes for PCS coding.
Okay.
You'll find in your textbook for our PCS coding class where we talk about all the categories I'm sorry, not categories, characters that build up each character of the 7 characters in our PCS coding. And so we always start with the first one that identifies what type of coding we're doing. The majority of our PCS book, and I have one here I'll show you. Of course, just like in ICD-10 CM, we start with some lovely pictures and diagrams, which have lots of really great reference tools that you will need as a new coder.
Okay.
Our alphabetical in PCS is quite a bit smaller, but a lot of the tools that we will use will include things like approach tables and root operations and references like that. So out of the entire book, this is your alphabetical. It's rather small. And the idea with PCS coding is your alphabetical will take you to the table, and then you build the code from there. Your tables are always the first 3 characters, which are going to identify your section, and then your body area and the root operation. And so we would build it the same way here, but we have to know where it falls under. So if, for example, we're going to learn about this over the first several weeks, and that's going to be our first couple of topics. The majority of your sections will actually fall under the first one, which is the 0 there for medical and surgical. And just to give you an example of what that looks like compared to your book, that's approximately half of all of the coding is just under the 0.
Okay.
Everything else then breaks down based off of the different areas.
Okay.
Which is only about half of what's left. So twice as many for
the rest.
Everything else is about half of that. And then all this is appendices. And those appendices will really guide you and help you in identifying correct coding for PCS. So when you get that book, make sure to take advantage of that. You do not have those references in this website.
Okay.
So you'll want to use your textbook just to guide you in building the code. You'll identify first what type of section it's going to fall under, and then what body area it applies to. So if I had a lesion that was removed from the skin of my back, I would identify whether or not it's subcutaneous tissue versus skin, and then go into that area. And then I would look at the root operation and determine if it was an extraction as opposed to a resection.
Okay.
And then you can see different options that help you build the code from there. In
Okay.
PCS, it's going to be very much more of a building a code rather than confirming guidelines. You will need to reference the textbook a lot, but you'll have all those guidelines in your textbook as you're reading. The plus the lecture videos where we talk about each of those and how it applies should help you build these over your first couple weeks until you get those books in.
Okay.
Any other questions on those?
No, I find that it seems like I'll be able to maneuver, although you say it's harder for the PCS, but it seems like it's a little bit easier to maneuver than the CM.
It's easier to maneuver, but it doesn't have as much references. And without those references, it's very easy to get lost.
Okay.
I think this is a wonderful website for established coders and individuals who have been coding for at least 1 or 2 years. But when you're learning, there's so much that you don't know that we don't want to use this as a main tool because it doesn't guide you. It doesn't give you the references you need. So if you go in with a grain of salt, knowing that, and knowing that it's going to take a little bit of extra work to find the information, that's good. That'll be better. Another thing I also say is, Google is your friend. You can always work with Google, just never marry her. What that means is use your brain in order to identify what is or isn't accurate and what sounds correct. So if I want to know about root operations in ICD-10 PCS, I can Google information. I want to pay attention to what comes up. Who do I trust? I trust AHEMA because I know they're the organization that does my credentialing. Some of these other ones may be trying to sell me money, maybe working with other companies. CMS is a great reference because they kind of set all the guidelines. But if I don't understand how to read the guidelines, that might be a little difficult for me. But you can just take some time to go through these. I would definitely take, like say, ihs.gov, but YouTube may or may not give me the correct information. So Google is your friend. You can use that. You're not alone in this class, so feel free to reach out to me as well with any kind of questions or issues you have. So.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And I apologize that I took your time on a Friday. I should have just logged in a little bit later yesterday, but
I set this up.
I'm
glad you were able to come in. I know the rest of the class, we had a few yesterday, and I appreciate you letting us record you today while we went over these so that anybody else that missed it will also have that opportunity.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.